Welcome to
The Business of Benefits is your no BS, no sales guide to real solutions.
No gimmicks, just the truth about how to take control, transform your benefits, and care for your most valuable asset, your people.
If you're tired of the same old sales pitch and you're ready to rethink your benefits, this podcast is for you. The truth is out there. Are you ready to hear it? Everybody, welcome back. This is the Business of Benefits podcast. I'm your host, Chelsea Ryckis, and today we are interviewing Rachel Strauss. If you are in the benefits industry, you probably know her, or if you follow her on LinkedIn, you've probably heard her referred to as the PBM Princess. So I love her. I think she is quite the character, but more importantly than her personality, she is so dang smart, and she is an absolute expert when it comes to pharmacy benefit managers, how to control those costs, what to look out for in your contracts, and you're going to hear all about it today. We dive into rebates. What are they? Are they good? Are they bad? What types of contract language should you be looking out for when it comes to rebates? What questions should you be asking of your vendors? Rachel also talks a lot about aligning incentives, which is, if you listen to me speak at all, that's my favorite topic to talk about as well. So she talks about how PBMs are paid. We didn't go into all 40, but there's 40 ways at least that PBMs can hide money. And we talked about a few of them. We talked about MAP, manufacturer's assistance, patient's assistance, international sourcing of drugs. We shared some stories on creative ways to lower cost. And then she leaves us with her biggest piece of advice for employers. So employers listening, HR, CFO, CEO, boards of directors, this is your chance to really learn how PBM started and exactly how to get control over that part of your plan. Let's get to it. All right, everybody, welcome to the Business of Benefits podcast. I am your host, Chelsea Ryckis, and I'm so excited about my guest today. She apparently, if you're watching on video, we all have the same preppy memo. We've both got high-collared bows on randomly. But nonetheless, I am here with the PBM Princess, is my favorite name for her, but Rachel Strauss, who owns her own PBM consulting firm. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here. I was really excited when you asked. I'm a big fan of the show.
Thank you. I don't know a lot of people that match my intensity and energy, and you are definitely one of them. So I was like, between this and the Nurse Deb episode, it's going to be hard for me to pick my favorite in terms of badass women that I've had on the show.
I mean, I'll already say, go with Nurse Deb. I don't know. I mean, that's like, there's Nurse Deb, and that's a level.
And then everybody else.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I'm honored to even be put in that same category.
I agree. Well, awesome. So this show, I know you should probably already know this, but just as a reminder to everybody, our show is focused on employers specifically. So while I'm sure there are advisors and point solution vendors and all sorts of people listening to it, who I'm really speaking to is employers, mid and large market employers that are really trying to get a peek behind the curtains of what is actually happening in their benefits plan. And whether they realize it or not, it's a business. Health insurance, healthcare finance, healthcare delivery, whatever you want to call it, it is a business at the end of the day, and it is a controllable expense that should be run with a business plan. So my goal is to always give employers as much information as possible so that they can actually create a business plan and get control over their top 1, 2, 3 expense. So with that, we're going to get into PBMs. So tell us, Rachel, if you actually give us a little bit of your background, because I think that's really important for everybody to understand how much of an expert you really are.
Sure. So it's wild, Chelsea, to feel as young as I am, know that I'm not as young as I feel, and be able to say that I've done something for now more than 2 decades. I have spent 23 years in the PBM space, almost 24 coming up. And I have my background truly was right out of college, and I started in underwriting pharmacy benefits and really understanding all of the different components to what goes into predicting pharmacy cost trend and all of the different components that make up a pharmacy benefit plan. And from there, because I wasn't just somebody who loved numbers. I also loved to talk, which will be evident in the 45 minutes to follow. I really loved explaining the numbers to consultants and employers and, really walking them through all of the different impacts they could have even 20 years ago in, tweaking this or changing that and really finding good results. And so, when you talk about PBM, I really have done pretty much everything outside of clinical. But I've heard enough clinical through the years and paid enough attention that I understand more than probably the average bear, if you will, that, by way of conditions and treatments. So yes, 20 plus years in PBM, working directly with employers, unions, municipalities, really anybody that's, looking to cut costs and pharmacy costs.
Amazing. So let's set the stage then for our employers on the PBM space right now, because I feel like if somebody doesn't know at this point what a PBM is, they may have been under a rock the last couple of years. But nonetheless, let's back it up. Can you tell us exactly like what does PBM stand for and what was the original goal when PBMs were implemented and designed?
Sure. So PBM, and again, it's good that you take a step back here because we do assume that everybody knows what
Always.
a PBM is. And I do think employers and the audience of your show are probably getting more and more wise to what a PBM is. But for those that may not, a PBM stands for Pharmacy Benefit Manager. PBMs really came to the scene close to 40 years ago, in the early to mid 80s was when you first saw this concept of a pharmacy benefit manager. And it was a way to connect the payer side of healthcare, right, with health insurance plans changing models. Pre the 80s, it looked a lot like our high deductible health plans do today. It used to be all these first dollars, and catastrophic claims was where insurance came in and would back everything up. And, when we saw this evolution in healthcare in the 80s, and I say this clearly, Chelsea, I will not age myself that much. This was before your and my time. But to see the cycles of where healthcare has gone in these last 40, 50 years, once costs started going up and first dollar did not seem as manageable, we saw this invention of the PPO network. And networks began to really start, tying control costs down for hospitals, leveraging patients that the carriers would sign up. And this was the era of Blue Cross, right? And all of the major carriers would later follow. And, it was the concept of a network that began first with the medical side. Well, pharmacy, because it's a little bit different in how pharmacy is billed, pharmacy is a product, right? You walk in a store, there is a retail transaction that is occurring. And on the back side, a product is leaving the store that has inventory. And so the concept of a PBM was really similar to medical, create a network of pharmacies, right, that would accept payment. It's a little different than medical because it is done instant. So it has, a way of, the easiest way I can explain it is like credit card purchasing, right? When you swipe a card, there's digital that talks to digital. That digital to digital is what the PBMs created. It was the network switch that enabled a pharmacy to process a prescription, instantly verify eligibility. Yes, this is a patient. Yes, they're on this health plan. And where it's evolved to today is, very complex because there are so many other factors in that, 0.2 second transaction. What is the drug? What are the members supposed to pay? What is the plan going to pay? And all of that is going through in milliseconds of, transactions. And that is, was the purpose of PBMs, was to create this ease of payment to the pharmacies and a network approach.
Thank you for the history lesson. I think that was actually really valuable. Before we get into how did it all go so wrong, I want to just take a quick step back and remind employers what the PBM kind of part is in a health plan, right? Because we talk PBM, Pharmacy Benefit Manager. Now we know what it is supposed to do and what it was intended to do. But let's talk about the overall picture of a health plan. So every single health plan, and if you've listened to the show before, you've heard me say this 100 times, has 4 pieces. So whether you are purchasing a shelf product from Blue Cross, United, Cigna, Aetna, or you're building your own custom healthcare plan, the same 4 pieces exist. We've got a third-party administrator. We've got stop-loss insurance. That's the actual insurance, which most people confuse. I'm purchasing health insurance and they only think of the insurance piece. But there's not TPA, stop-loss, pharmacy benefit manager, and then a network or no network. So today's episode, guys, is completely focused on just the PBM piece, the one piece of 4 components of every single health plan. And why I wanted to talk with an expert on PBMs is because it's the easiest part of a health plan to fix. It truly is. It's the lowest hanging fruit. There's so much fraud, waste, and abuse happening in this piece of the health plan. And the coolest part about it is it's easy to identify where it's happening. And then most importantly, it's easy to implement a fix. So it's very rarely are we asking employees to do anything different, because to Rachel's point, it's all transactions happening on the back end. So I hope that everyone's taking notes for this episode, because again, this will be the easiest way to save money in your health plan without impacting employee experience. Okay, so how did the whole PBM thing go so sideways? Like, why is Mark Cuban trying to fix this? Why do I hear about all this legislation passing? PBMs are under scrutiny. They're getting interviewed by Congress. What went wrong?
I mean, it's like anything with business and businesses that have no oversight, and, this is not intended to be any side of politics, because the word oversight seems to be one of those trigger words these days. But it really, boils down to there was a need for a way for prescriptions to be processed under a health plan. And you broke it down beautifully. There's different ways a health plan is built behind the scenes. But no matter how you purchase it, the PBM had to be a function, and it was created, right? You had entrepreneurs that came out, created systems for this adjudication process to happen. Then, you see business, as businesses evolve in any industry, you're always going to have somebody who, number one, thinks of a better way to do it, and also identifies opportunity to make money. And really what happened is that the pharmaceutical companies got in on this, right? For years and years and years, pharmaceutical companies would send women, typically women, to doctors' offices. And, they would talk about whatever drug it was. They would make these women experts on whatever the medication was. They would tell the doctor, the joke used to be you'd have a Lipitor pen back in the 80s on a Lipitor pad of paper with the promise of a Lipitor trip to Hawaii if they wrote enough medication, cholesterol drug for Lipitor back then. And then the government started seeing all these trends with doctors, and, and then these anti-kickback laws started in the late 80s, early 90s. And so pharma had to figure out a way to essentially retarget their marketing. Now, drug reps are still very much a thing, but they realized as the PBM industry really started to get a hold of, paying for medications, they realized that this was going to be the gatekeeper of how medications would be dispersed through the country. Because on one end, they'll tell the doctor, but if everybody has insurance, the insurance is who's going to call the shots on a lot of things, including their product. And that is where you began to get, in my opinion, into some serious misaligned incentives, because pharmaceutical companies had such a role in, what medications were being processed. When I got into the business, one of the large PBMs was actually owned by a pharmaceutical company. It was called Merck. Merck Pharmaceuticals owned Medco, which was a pharmacy benefit manager. And that merger, Merck Medco, coming together, not only making product, but also setting the prices that millions of members had. I mean, Merck Medco was on most Blue Cross plans, including my home state of Michigan. And so that was really, I believe, the beginning of when you started to see, like, wait a minute, like, if this company is just supposed to process claims, work with the pharmacies to keep prices down, but now no one's controlling what's coming off the shelves, right? You can walk into Target, you and I know, and we can go to those dollar bins and get lots of fun stuff with the $20 bill. But the minute like the certain aisles open up, I mean, you can spend in the thousands, because like Target is Target and really does have things at different price points. Imagine telling an employer like, okay, we're going to cover anything from the mall. Well, why would we want them to go to a high-end store if they could get everything simply from a different area? And that's really what in layman's terms, I cannot not use a shopping analogy. Sorry. It's just what I get to at every call, but it's what makes the most sense. I mean, we are consumers. And, I think that employers listening to this call have to understand that your entire health plan, whether you're fully insured or creatively self-funded, you are creating consumers out of your members, and they're the ones who help to control the cost. The tools that we give them, we as an industry, even in pharmacy, letting them educate themselves on how to best get their medications, at the lowest possible cost, that is where the PBM should play a role. So I made a long answer, ultimately we had misaligned incentives get involved and just a crazy amount of opportunities for PBMs to make money in all different areas.
I feel like I need to do an entire episode just on misaligned incentives. And I say that phrase probably 5 to 10 times a day when I'm speaking to prospects, clients, whoever, right? My own employees. These are the things we're looking out for. Everything that's rooted with healthcare and everything about healthcare inflation is rooted in misaligned incentives. So Rachel just very well explained how that works on the pharmacy benefit manager side. I'm usually talking about it in terms of broker compensation and other vendor compensations. But I know that PBMs have a way of very creatively, just like brokers have a way of very creatively skirting around certain things and hiding compensation. So I once saw this diagram, Rachel. It showed 40 different ways that a PBM hides money that's not actually disclosed directly in their contract. It's very creatively worded, to use your word again. Can you tell us what a few of those might be, like the top 3, 4?
Yeah. And, I always use this disclaimer because I personally was an employee for many, many years of a pharmacy benefit manager. I am grateful for the years I had with the company. And I earned an income because I worked for a pharmacy benefit manager that had to create revenue to pay employees. So I always like to say that, when I come out and anytime employer groups, please know your vendors do need to get paid. Your brokers need to get paid. We are all doing this for a living. It's a sidebar story, but I know somebody in our space, Chelsea, who her title is Chief Revenue Officer. And somebody had a problem with that being her title because they're like, you should never be pushing revenue in the healthcare business. It's like, well, you just have to think about how revenue is driven, right? Because revenue means we all have jobs and the economy is good and you're doing it the right way.
It's more
so in these 40 ways, what'd you say?
It's more about incentives. It's less about, and I'll give you a quick example. So yesterday I had a conversation with an employer whose consultant is making, this is on a fully insured Cigna plan. And again, so in a fully insured model, just so everybody's on the same page, the carrier owns and operates all 4 pieces that we talked about. So they have full control over it. Think of it like a closed box. You're not going to get data. You're not going to have levers to pull. You're not going to be able to get creative with a lot of the stuff Rachel's going to share today on how to save money on drugs. None of that. So there's really not a lot of work, I would say, at least not strategic work. It's going to be more transactional, like ID cards were lost. Somebody got turned away at the doctor, stuff like that. It's not true strategic consulting work. The fee for the consultant was over $110 per employee per month. And the importance of this conversation is that employers need to understand, you have to benchmark these costs, right? They might not know because they've had the same relationship for decades that's outrageous. What's more in line, and just for reference, a lot of fully insured plans, actually, if it's a per employee per month fee, it's going to be somewhere between $25, maybe to $45. Wow. So that's just an example of completely misaligned, but they would never know, right? So let's try to educate employers next on what are the things like that they wouldn't know that are happening in the PBM that they might be working with, and how would they figure it out without a consultant,
without a consultant. I mean, the thing is, in the fully insured space, it's, there's so many areas that we could talk about. I mean, this is your own hour, session. I think, the couple of things are that you need to understand is when you're in a big box scenario, the brokers are not always incentivized to move you to, reduce your premium. I mean, I think that's what you're getting at, because if they're paid a percentage of what you're spending, it doesn't make sense. But specific to PBM, I allowed this to go off the rails because I went down there and you followed me. But to bring it back to, I think what you were asking with the 40 ways a PBM makes money is, PBMs can make money from administrative fees, which I think is reasonable. PBMs can make money from transaction fees. Pharmacies or PBMs can make money from network spread, which is they may negotiate a great rate, but they're building in an undisclosed amount per claim that the employer group has no idea that there's this margin being built up. And, really where the biggest amount comes from is rebates. I could talk about this at hours at length, and it's part of the reason I wanted to be on my own and outside of the industry, because rebates are still one of the most mystified areas in PBM, because we're getting better at saying the words pass through or transparent, which, so the audience knows, they are not interchangeable. Pass through and transparent do not mean the same thing. And even the words pass through, I'm afraid, are starting to be overused and manipulated. And that is because you can only pass through what is given to you, right? And given to the entity claiming to be passed through. So, for example, if a PBM is giving 100% of something to you, number one, they had to negotiate with somebody else to get that 100%. Does that make sense so far? Right? They had to get, there's an outside contract that may be held by an outside company that did that. And so there's just, that's another revenue stream, right? To negotiate those rebate contracts, which don't count as the rebates for the employer group. And then you've got pharmaceutical influence, right? You've got pharmaceutical companies outside of just rebates, but coming in and paying for data. One of the biggest issues I have, and I know we're going to tease at the end of this episode, questions employers should ask, especially in the self-funded space, is what happens to your data? Do the PBMs sell the data? And the reason this drives me crazy is because you and I can fight the fight, right? We can do everything we're doing every day, talk about all the strategies we'll get into. But if you're giving this data back to pharmaceutical companies to see what doctors we have done beautiful things with and gotten members on lowest net cost drugs, and now these pharmaceutical companies know exactly what doctors are not hitting numbers because they're writing for generics or lesser cost drugs, you are literally fighting a system. And so that data is why, AstraZeneca is advertising on your TV, or even in my own LinkedIn, I see ads for medications, and it's just hilarious because, wow, am I the wrong target SEO for them? But
no kidding.
It's just a matter. So when there's 40 ways, it's because the wording can be so clever in these contracts. And I think, again, to go back to what I was saying in the beginning, PBMs should make money, but they should make money delivering value. And that value comes from managing the M, pharmacy benefit, managing the program. And that is where, I think we get into how incentives can align within the PBM space and, how you can tell if a PBM is doing a good job.
So tell us then, and then next I want to jump into rebates, more of a deeper dive into that. But to wrap up the incentive and alignment conversation, what is a good structure for how a PBM should get paid? Like, what would the most aligned structure look like for employers who want to take this step?
So first and foremost, a clear administrative fee. There's arguments on both sides, and I get asked this a lot on podcasts about, do I like a PEPM or a per claim better? I honestly don't think it matters as long as you're not seeing like more than maybe 20% the national average of claims per member per month. I think that yes, a PBM should be incentivized to keep costs low and keep claims low. Should they get paid if it's a member that doesn't use any claims? I still argue yes, because there's work to enroll people and calls, and it should level itself out. But either way, a clear and defined, reasonable administrative fee. In my opinion, and seeing what I've seen, a PBM should be making anywhere between $8 and $10 a contract. Give or take, depending on how aggressive they are with cost containment programs. I've seen as high as $14, per contract, and that's okay. When you're seeing $2 or $3 or $0 as an administrative fee, that either means they're using other people to do the work, or they're not being honest about what they're making. They wouldn't be in business. And so that's, really where the rubber hits the road. So that's the first piece, is knowing the administrative fee. And number two, what is the PBM willing to put at risk? And this is something that I am getting, it really is what rebirthed my career about 6 months ago. There are ways that, PBMs can actually put PEPMs at risk. and say, we are not going to go above this. And if you do, employer, we're going to cut the check. And, it's everybody knows there's going to be some horrific case that's going to happen in some course of time, but let the PBM insure that risk that if it does, because their job is to really work with everything else. And so to me, putting fees at risk and putting spend at risk on these self-funded employers, that is how you know a PBM is willing to go the distance.
I absolutely love that. Thank you so much. I think that was really good information. All right, let's get into rebates. What is a rebate? Why is it good? Why is it bad? How does it work? Can you just give us like the big overview for employers who probably hear the term all the time? And you know what? I think a lot of people who listen or who are involved in benefits, from my experience, they know in theory what a rebate is, and they know it's like happening in their plan, and maybe they're getting it, maybe they're not. I just don't think people, even in the industry, understand what the heck is going on with rebates. So please.
They don't. And what's an interesting thing about me is, in the beginning of my career for a very long time, my first PBM that I worked with, we were the only ones in the country until we had to that actually operated on a zero rebate model, like no rebates. We didn't get them. We didn't give them. They didn't exist. And so we spent decades, really watching the market and how rebates evolved. And so I come at this from a pretty opinionated side of the world. So I will, give that disclaimer once again, because rebates were always created as an incentive to push product, right? And, unlike when you or I go to Best Buy, I mean, you and I are probably not going to Best Buy, our husbands are, let's be real. But if we did and our opinions were used to buy whatever, it'll probably be pink, right? For me, like the pink, anything by KitchenAid. If I'm buying it and there's a rebate, great. I'm a consumer. I made a decision. I'm going to fill out the card to get $200 back or whatever the rebate is. And it goes to me and the story is done. It's a similar concept with rebates. However, number one, it's not always disclosed how that rebate was getting back to a plan, right? Because keep in mind, the employer is buying something, a drug, on behalf of a member, and a rebate is generated. And the question is number one, how is that rebate generated? So the biggest misconception, with the exception of specialty, has always been that it's one drug for one rebate. That is not the way it works. It is based on market share. If you, just happen to dispense an expensive drug, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a rebate. The rebate is coming when you've dispensed, 20% more per quarter of that drug. And then you get these rebates that are essentially incentivizing the PBM to keep processing a certain medication. And where we've evolved with rebates, because there has begun to be that oversight in rebates, and that, the original PBM I was with, we never got into the rebate game because we saw how it was just moving the needle up. So what happened is the rebates, if you will, all formed organizations offshore. And so what happened is these primarily three major group purchasing organizations formed. And so now all rebates, just so for the most part in this country, are now processed and tracked and are all offshore, overseas. So there's no access to exactly where the numbers are coming from at the root. But these group purchasing organizations are contracting with what are called downstream aggregation partners. And it all depends on how close you are to the top for how you get these dollars back. And for the employers, it's so important for you to understand what is driving the rebates. And that's, so you said, are they good or are they bad? I've come to accept that they exist. I don't know that I think that they are necessarily good, because to me, I would rather just see the drugs less expensive to begin with, like they are in other countries, right? That are not playing this, game. But here's how you can determine if you have a good rebate program. And this is, again, where I'm spending the next 12 to 18 months really focused on. Number one, would your PBM allow you to do a different contract with a rebate aggregator? Or do you have to use the rebates that your PBM is providing? That's number one. Now, the beauty of working with independent boutique PBMs that can do really wonderful things is sometimes they don't have the ability to say, we have to use our rebate aggregator. Okay. You're going to have to get them from us. Okay. Well, then the next question I have is when you put in really creative, things that I know you and I are going to get to, does that impact rebates? Does that impact your admin fees? And that's where you start to, again, back to those 40 areas of, hidden revenue. If you getting a drug from Canada, which is not going to have a rebate, costs more money from the PBM, you need to ask why. And that might very well be because they build a very low admin fee based on rebate administration is what they'll tell you. Even though it's 100% pass through, they're getting paid for the administration of the program. And so that's, and that's why I always advise, when we talk to employers and consultants, you don't want guarantees on rebates. You want pass-through language, but you don't want it to be a script minimum or a per claim, because then things get moved around and you can't make decisions to do lowest net cost. So that's kind of, hopefully a good enough explanation of rebates. They are paid by pharmaceutical companies. It is to buy market share product. And ultimately, where you see the most egregious form of rebates and where you can do your inspection is in your formulary. And this is, Chelsea, when you and your team here, somebody was on a drug and now this year it's not covered, they have to get something different. This is where you kind of see where the rebates are, because the PBM is typically going to prefer the drug with a rebate versus a non-preferred, which won't have a rebate. And if the non-preferred is cheaper than the preferred, the PBM better really substantiate what that rebate is back to the group and how fast they're getting it, because it does take 6 to 12 months to get that dollar back. And so, you can go back and forth and decide where it's worth it. And in some specialty instances, it very may well be, but you just have to be aware these rebates are not free money that just come back to you.
Yeah, there's strings attached, folks. That was super helpful. Thank you. So I know in the PBM space, there's so many acronyms, right? And when I first started in the industry about a decade ago, I'm like, MAP, PAP, IPP, like PBM, TPA, it's crazy. So tell us a bit about, let's start with MAP, Manufacturers Assistance Programs. Where would an employer see this in their programs? Who's responsible for making this happen? And what is it?
Sure. So manufacturer assistance programs were designed, for two different reasons. Number one, they were originally designed for members who did not have access to high cost medication specialty 20 years ago. And, were designed so that if a member really couldn't afford a specialty drug and they needed the numbers of patients to be on them, there were programs members could apply for, and you could get access to them at no cost. So that was the first, right? And that was a wonderful strategy for employers who really couldn't afford it. I know it, a PBM I worked at, we did a pool of uninsured people pre-ACA, and we blew this up because it was an amazing way. We had a finite amount of money. We had thousands of lives without access to healthcare, and we had a way to get them medication. And that was really how we began learning about these MAP programs. Okay. Then what evolved, and this was really in reaction to the high deductible health plan movement, where these manufacturers got smart and said, wow, if people are going to pay first dollar like they did, remember, in the beginning of healthcare, people are not going to be able to afford $2,000 or $3,000 for their medication. So let's put coupons out there so that any members out of pocket will cover the cost, which employers listening, someone else has to pay that bill, right? So it's almost like giving your children, I go back to shopping all the time. If you give your child a credit card, you're going to let them know what their budget is, right? Well, with these, it's zero for the member. They're not paying anything. And you're going to get this big bill that they have no idea what it is. So both of these programs should be used for employers, when it benefits both. I believe that it's great to get members lower cost and, try to get them coupons, but not at your, as the employer's ultimate stick it to you cost. And, with high deductible health plans and out of pocket maximums, these coupons essentially are sometimes getting employers to, be right on the hook before the member even spends $1. So these strategies are great when they're used properly. And again, I'm not saying we should stick it back to the employee. We just want them to benefit both of you.
Yes, creating win-wins is where healthcare, you really see it take a turn for the best, financially, employee experience, and employers listening. That's what you want to create. And actually, I would take it a step further: win-win-win. So win being employer, second win being employee, financially and from an experience perspective. Third being all of your vendors. If you've created contracts where there's aligned incentives, then your vendors win when the plan performs well too. That's ideal. Talk through patient assistance programs.
Yeah. So patient assistance is that MAP where we get it for no cost. It's a great strategy. And, the problem is
the PAP or the patient
PAP and MAP to me are interchangeable. I think there's two forms of them. There's getting the drug at no cost, where the drug is not on the formulary. It is a medication that, a member qualifies for financially oftentimes. They are unfortunately getting harder and harder to get these medications for free. Unfortunately, there's been some abuse in this category of medication and games that have been played by the industry and again, I will argue they're games that have been played because the industry made us play them, right? I mean, I was at an amazing session. I'll give Leaf Health a shout out. They had a conference and they had somebody raise their hand and say, patient assistant programs really should have been designed to be employer assistant programs, because most people in this country are not paying for their thousands and thousands of dollar drugs. And these assistant programs were designed to offset patient experience when really they should have been designed to offset the payer experience. But because it doesn't work that way, you've got some lawsuits out there right now that are looking at how these patient assistant programs should be working. And, if you are an employer that truly does not have the ability to cover these specialty drugs, and you're like, we are not going to cover them, then that's where these programs are amazing. And, the PBMs will do the work, or there's, third parties that will help do the application process and, will really work towards getting the member that medication. They do have to submit financial documents. It's not, a 2-second form. There are clinical needs. But if you do it right, then yes, those drugs can be completely shifted off your plan, and the pharmaceutical companies will pay them.
Yeah. We just had a $75,000 a month drug taken off of one of our plans because one of my employees found a MAP program that the patient qualified for. So in certain cases, it can be massive wins.
Massive. Yeah. And they should be tried. And I think the point here for the employers is to understand there are like 12 strategies that are out there that, and it's how many of them is each PBM doing, and, where is their incentive to do it? So MAP is an amazing thing, and it absolutely helps. And I could share win after win after win. But it can't be the only strategy because it doesn't always work. And, we're in an era where 2 years ago, I would have said it works 60-70% of the time. Now it's about 30% of the time. So, where we're evolving, Chelsea, and I don't know if this was one of your questions, but we're evolving now into the 340B space. And that is, one I'm very passionate about because, for those, again, more acronyms, numbers, codes, right? We speak in our own language. 340B is essentially a regulation from the federal government enabling what are considered to be federally qualified health centers, which are community hospitals or community health centers that see people without insurance, right? We need these places to exist for, the access to healthcare for all Americans. And the government is giving them just the incredible ability to purchase medications to serve their communities at a fraction of the price so they can make margin, right? And that they have the ability. So the question is how can employers utilize these federally qualified health centers? How is the PBM helping set this up? Again, there's no rebates on 340B. And so what the PBM has to do is find the network within the population of the people. And we're seeing, we're not getting them for free, but I just, 2 days ago helped move $150,000 medication, and we got it for $3,000 total. And that included the profit margin that the hospital needed to make. So you can imagine they got it pennies on the dollar. They were good doing it for 3,000. And everybody won, and except the rebate game, because that drug did not qualify for a rebate. So that's the strategy I think that we're going to see really blow up. I hope it's not taken advantage of, because it's federally, regulated. And the problem will be if PBMs take advantage of this 340B pricing and tack, because what we are hearing is the PBMs that have tacked on their own rates to those medications to make spread on 340B, because it doesn't have to be transparent. So that's kind of, what I'm hoping we don't see, which leads us into other strategies. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, let's talk about, so something that we use a lot is international sourcing. And I know that is incredibly controversial if you're in the industry. Some people are all about it. Some people say that it's a liability and that there's lawsuits coming around international sourcing. So it's a hot topic. But I will tell you, just yesterday, spoke with a prospect, not very large, I think 250-ish insured. And it wasn't even one of the biggest impact stories, but nonetheless, 250 insured. And we've got, just on international savings, 330,000 annually, which, it's not going to make or break anything, but it's significant for that size of a company, right? We have another client right now with, just from using the international sourcing, they've got about 500 insured. Their per member per month cost on prescriptions prior to having a fiduciary pass through transparent PBM was about $256 per member per month. And now it's at $52 per member per month. We didn't ask them to do anything different, guys. We just used international and these other strategies we're talking about. So how does international work, and what's your opinion on it?
So I'm from Detroit originally, which was 15 to 20 minutes from the Canadian border. So I've been promoting international importation for pretty much my entire career. I believe importation should always be an offer by every employer. I think the controversy is when it is done, incorrectly, when it is not done thoughtfully and, in partnership with the PBM, because that is where it can get dangerous and or expensive. And I'll explain why. But when you are importing from tier 1 countries, and that is the first thing I need employers to hear, tier 1, Canada, UK, New Zealand, and Israel are the tier 1s that I'm actually going to Israel in 2 months to visit one of these pharmacies. So I'll make sure to get you a clip to share with your folks. But I'm going to show everybody that the box says Ozempic. It is from the manufacturer. These are actual drugs. Where the controversy is coming from is because you've had some international providers, if you don't do your research, that are not sourcing from tier 1. They may be sourcing from other countries, which again is fine, but there can be a liability because they don't have the same checks and balances systems. And the lawsuit, you're referring to is, is it AstraZeneca? One of them is Gilead, I think, is suing because some of the HIV medications that were imported were different dosages and different warning labels than what we have here in the US. And so there were some issues that, were endorsed improperly. Now, employers, this liability is not on you, because we at least recommend, and hopefully you would not, I'm sure Chelsea says this to all our clients, you can't mandate a member get their medication from another country. Right. So that is the first piece. And so I believe some of the liability is going to be if there was an enforcement that they had to get this drug internationally. The next piece is, tariffs. I'm getting asked a lot, are tariffs going to impact this? Our belief right now is the answer is no, because again, it is personal importation. It is shipped to them as a recipient. I think if anything, the tariffs are going to affect our U.S. importation prices, because the U.S. is essentially getting drugs from other countries. And that is where I think we're going to see the tariffs and cause, from an AWP perspective, the overall pricing the employer are paying. Unfortunately, like eggs, right? Everyone wants to talk about eggs. I think that's where we could potentially see some issues. But personal importation is an amazing strategy to put in place if 340B is not an option. Because again, at the very least, you should know, and the employee should know what it costs. because it should be a financially driven decision.
One other thing I'll add to this is, so when we've implemented this with clients, the way it looks from an employee experience, so employers understand, is, an employee fills the drug. We always allow the first fill to go through. There's no mandating that you must use an international pharmacy. But when it comes through the claims file and it's a ping that, it's one of 270 drugs that we can source from a tier 1 country. Again, reiterating Rachel's point, it's literally the exact same drug by the exact same manufacturer. The only difference is it's getting shipped to employees, usually in a 90-day supply from Canada. And the best part about the program is that the savings are so significant, usually 50 to 70%, that you can give this to the employee at no cost. So waived copay, waived deductible, whatever it is that's your coverage on that specialty drug or whatever drug, no cost, which is unbelievable. A 90-day supply of a drug at no cost. It's mail order to them. They're likely already using a mail order pharmacy if it's, a very expensive drug. So that is the best part about it, is that win-win situation, right? The employer is saving 50 to 70%, sometimes even more, which is insanity. And then the employee is getting it at no cost. I'm glad that you really focused on tier 1 countries, because, we just had this recently with a client where the attorney, the in-house counsel at the client was like, well, I don't want drugs from Canada. They're not as good. And then I actually had a carrier rep tell a prospect of mine. The prospect asked the carrier, hey, why can't we use international pharmacy? I've been shown that there's, 500,000, like $500,000 in savings on this from a consultant we're considering working with. And of course, remember, the carrier owns their PBM. They're going to lose their rebates.
And the pharmacies.
Yes.
And the dispensing pharmacy.
That's another really good point that we haven't even talked about. But so they're going to lose their rebates. They're going to lose whatever it is that their hidden fees on, right? And they told this employer that international pharmacy is not FDA approved. Can you help me make that make sense?
Well, it's not. You know why? Because the FDA is in our country, but they have their version of the FDA.
Like, and it's like, as a Canadian, it's actually stricter, just so everybody knows.
It's wild to me when that is the explanation, because it's like, right. And their ATMs also don't dispense dollar bills because it's another country, but they have money. And so it's like, it's really this, the fear, I would think at this point, because at the same topic, everybody that I know that wanted Ozempic last year would do anything to get it, to the point where they were taking compounded versions of the medication not covered that were mostly coming from China or India. So I think that it's all about access, right? And sometimes, you can't make an employee use international, but I have had employers say that's the only way that we can pay for them to access it. So there are ways, like, some employers are just tired of paying a medication, and we just have to work together. I mean, there are, the most frustrating thing for me today is seeing how angry Americans are at the rise in healthcare costs. And there's so much that can be done, and it starts with our employers, because we can all do it together.
And I see this constantly. Change in healthcare happens one employer at a time. It's one employer listening to a podcast like this, realizing, oh, wow, there is something I can do about these pharmacy costs. Pharmacy makes up the bulk of our spend. Wow, I have options. Like exploring, getting serious about your fiduciary obligation under ERISA to like actually look into these other strategies. And again, I will reiterate, this is the easiest, lowest hanging fruit. I can't tell you, in all of the plans that we design, the transformation in the pharmacy, it's the first thing we do, very first year, because again, employee experience is hardly impacted whatsoever. And actually you're creating those win-wins. So they're actually very happy, very happy consumers. But the financial impact is massive on the back end as well. What big legislation do you see coming down the pipeline for PBMs, or any big changes that we should know about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have some bipartisan hope that there is going to be a continued pressure on transparency. And what that means is insight into how the pharmacy benefits are making money, insight into the rebate piece, as much as, they're never going to be able to fully audit, because as I mentioned, they're all overseas. But giving detail as to how much each drug is actually generating and a little bit more detail as to when rebates have gotten paid and what claims they're on, and not aggregated data, because that's how we help create the stop loss side of it as well. I'm seeing, I was just at CapCon in Washington, D.C. with over 1,000 brokers that were passionately talking about, some of the legislation going for PBMs not owning their own dispensing arms. Mail order being owned by a pharmacy is where you're seeing a lot of these lawsuits coming into play, because if you own it's that discount game, right? A PBM can guarantee you a discount or be passed through in discounts. But when you get to owning the entity, what's passed through at that point? Because markup is not disclosed, right? I mean, there's no control anymore if you own the entity that you are dispensing drugs for and selling them.
Can you explain the vertical integration? So I know who own, what carriers own which pharmacies, which own, but can you break that down? The 3 or 4 PBMs that own 80% of the market, who owns each of them? Can you give us that rundown?
Yes, absolutely. So you've got Express Scripts, which is partnered with Aetna. Express Scripts, yes, with Aetna. I get them all. I usually have my chart, and this is now no disclosure.
Express Scripts is Cigna, and then CVS Care.
Cigna is Aetna. Right. Thank you. My brain is a little tired this morning. You've got CVS Caremark, which is owned by CVS. And you've got Optum, which is owned by United Healthcare. And so underneath there are charts that are a million of them that actually go lower and lower. But by the way, the 3 largest GPOs that I mentioned all have a board of directors. So the largest one, and I'm going to get this wrong, so I almost want to look quickly on my phone, but the 3 largest GPOs, the first one being Ascent, which I think is in Switzerland, Ascent Rebate GPO. I believe the chairman of the board of that is ESI Holdings. So not Express Scripts. So which is what makes me laugh, because they come out and say, we're going to do pass-through pricing, pass-through rebates. Okay, well, they don't actually do the rebates. ESI Holdings does, an offshore holding company that is then the chairman of the board of Ascent Rebates, which, by the way, is who, even some of the best pass-through PBMs are still going up channels to get through Express Scripts' rebates, right? And so the 3 ones, okay, so the next one is called Zinc Health Services, which is CVS is the chairman of the board of that one. And it's not giving me the rest. And MSR, which is Optum. And so they all are chairman of the boards of these major rebate GPOs, and employers who are self-funded. Please ask how your rebates are being aggregated, who is doing it, because that's how you're going to kind of find, and even in the most innocent of PBMs, they're not getting into this business, but they're contracting with somebody. And that's why I'm saying, there's so many layers of the onion that even, and how one of the questions I've been asking PBMs lately is, do we have to use your aggregator? And if they say no, then I really know there's no skin in the game. Those are PBMs who have a more realistic admin fee in that $10, $12 range.
Right. That is such good information. And I think really good for employers to understand, the web that's woven in healthcare is super complex. And the vertical integration, to me, when a company owns a company who owns a company and they can just shift dollars into different buckets, that is always a giant red flag, because even if you have access to claims data, you can't possibly track all of it, or where it's really coming from, where it's going, who's got your best interest in mind. So let's end with, out of all that you know within the PBM space, if you could give an employer listening one piece of advice, the very first, most impactful thing that they could do, what would it be?
You mean for purchasing or today with their vendors?
Just anything. What if you were an employer and you heard this podcast and maybe you are considering going self-funding, or you are self-funded, what is the thing that they should do?
See what's out there. I would see if you can get a top drug report. Just have insight into what are your members taking, what are the medications, and is there something you can do about it? And that's the first piece is, okay, what is our specific? Go to your broker and say, what can we do about it? If the answer your broker says is nothing, unfortunately, we're with a carrier that you can't, that's a problem. And you need to say why. Because I would argue, even in a fully insured environment, I have helped people that are, have some high cost claim, find another way to do it so that next year's renewal doesn't have it on there. And everybody's still won. So there is always something you can do if you have a high cost drug.
I love that piece of advice. And I think I've talked to a lot of employers who are, maybe they're in a fully insured or even a level funded program. They're large enough that they're getting maybe top 10, top 25 drug spend, right? And you ask them about claims data and they say, yeah, I have claims data. And, we're with a transparent PBM. I understand what's going on. Okay. So, Humira comes across as number 1 or 2. What can you do to lower that for next year or in the current year? Ask the broker, come back. There's not actually anything we can do, although the carrier does own a specialty pharmacy, so we might be able to access a few dollars, there. Having data and being able to do something with it are two very, very different things, right? Like you should be able to source that drug internationally. You should be able to do all sorts of things if you're in the right arrangement that would significantly lower the cost of probably at least half of the drugs on the top 25 list. Cool. Well, that was really fun. Do you want to say anything else to our employers listening, or how can they get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me through LinkedIn or rachelmstrauss.com. But I'm happy to help. And, hopefully I believe we have a world where consultants are getting better, like Chelsea and her husband, Donovan, and are continuing to push. And boy, we should really make a documentary about this. Don't you think, Chelsea?
I think we should. Hey, aren't we already doing that?
I mean, you'll have to find out.
To be determined, guys. There may or may not be a really explosive PBM documentary in the works. So Rachel and I are both producers on that. We will share more information when we're allowed to share more information. But in the meantime, Rachel is going to give all of our listeners a pretty sweet giveaway. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I have put together the top 10 ways you can lower your pharmacy costs, questions to ask your broker, and if you're interested in going to RFP, what that should and can look like.
I love it. So guys, we will make sure you can reach out directly to Rachel for that. We also have newsletters that go out about the podcast. We will make sure it's included in that. And then also on LinkedIn, the Business of Benefits podcast, if you follow us there, we'll link access to that as well when this episode drops. So Rachel, thank you so much for being here. This was super enlightening, and just keep doing the good work you're doing. We need more people like you.